Hey, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Women in Youth Ministry podcast. My name is Heather Kennison, and this week's guest is Roslyn Hernández. Roslyn is the DEI manager and content producer at the Fuller Youth Institute, podcast producer at Chasing Justice, and a contributor at Think Christian. Roslyn is also a spiritual director. She is a modern mystic passionate about decolonizing and reindigenizing, public theology, pop culture, and culinary traditions. I have so many questions. So, Roslyn, welcome. Tell us something about yourself. Who are you? Where are you? And one fun fact about you that has nothing to do with ministry.
Yeah. So who am I? Well, you just kind of just mentioned a little bit of who I am. I am someone who is doing a lot of work in their personal theology and is on a journey of re-indigenizing not just my theology, but also just the way I live life in this world and the way I understand myself and others. Let's see, a fun fact about me. I really love art, and I went to undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, and I studied film and media studies, art history, and Spanish. And so there's a really interesting mix of things there, and I am not really doing anything that is directly related to those things, but um, I always I have always seen myself as someone who kind of eclectically uses everything that has happened in my life and brings it into my current ministry or work. And so um, I really see that coming through, especially nowadays with everything that I've done. Yeah.
I've definitely heard about decolonizing our faith, but I've never heard the term re-indigenizing our faith. I think that is really cool. Could you explain a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so decolonizing means, that we're kind of like thinking through and picking apart all of the aspects of our theology or our faith or our life that are related to ideologies that are white supremacy, related to white supremacy or colonization. When we say that we decolonize, we're taking those things away, but we're also still centering colonization. And so when we say re-indigenizing, we're centering the indigenous aspect of what we are trying to find, or at least in my perspective or in my life as a person who is an ancestor whose ancestors are indigenous. I'm trying to look for my roots and learn more about them and their spiritual practices. So I'm re-indigenizing my theology and my practices in that way.
Very cool. Your bio also mentions that you're a podcast producer at Chasing Justice. What is that podcast about?
So that podcast is about activism and social justice. And right now we actually just started a new season called what type of activist are you? And we're
Mm.
talking about loosely based on the Enneagram. Everyone has a way of doing something for social justice, and not everyone's going to do it the same, right? We're not always going to have an activist that's like front and center and like speaking at protests and things like that. We all have different ways of contributing to change, and so that's what we're talking about this season.
Very cool. You also mentioned loving pop culture. What is pop culture? What does that mean to you? Like, are you like really into like music or movies or shows or celebrities? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, yeah. So as I mentioned, I went to undergrad and studied film and media studies, and film has been like a love of my life since I like learned about it in high school, and so I also see it as a way of understanding our culture. A lot of the cultural products that are produced by a society tell about a lot about that society and what that society thinks and values and how they see people that are part of that society. And so for me, it's really important to understand cultural products in order to understand people. That's the way we express who we are, right? And so um yeah, pop culture is could be music, it could be television, it could be film, it could be books. And I am someone who, as someone who is not just someone who was born in the US but also has Latin American ancestry, there's such a wide variety of music and film that I have access to, and so those are really like ways that I learn to see the world, other people, and even how God's working in the world.
So cool. So I'm going to ask you a really superficial question because I always love to have like a really random icebreaker. And
Yes.
today's random icebreaker is the zombie apocalypse is coming and you are stuck in a house with three celebrities. Who are they? You
Okay.
were giving such deep answers, and I'm like, so the zombie apocalypse.
No, and you know what? There's actually this movie that I really like that is really funny, but also kind of superficial like that. It's called like Romeo and Juliet and Zombies or something like that. So I love this question. Okay. Anytime you can put zombies into any question, I'm here for it.
There we go.
Let's see. Who would I have? Um, okay. I think someone from like The Walking Dead,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay.
Um, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking out on his name. Who is the Mandalorian? Do you remember? Pedro
Oh,
Pascal.
yes. Sorry, I was sinning for a minute. Let me get it together. He's so handsome. Goodness.
Okay, him. He's funny. He speaks Spanish. He's, like seasoned. Like there's a
Mhm.
lot of stuff there. And he's been in a lot of shows where, there's zombies or there's like life-threatening things. So
Yeah.
hopefully having acted like his life was in danger, like helps us survive. And then probably, oh, I don't know. An a celebrity that's actually a really smart person, like someone who has a degree. I don't know, maybe like, the actress who was, Sheldon Cooper's
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
love interest. She has like a doctorate in something, I can't
Is that
remember.
Kaylee? No, that's the other
No.
person. The one who hosts Jeopardy now?
Yeah, Maya, is her name Mayim something?
I think
Yes,
so.
Mayim Bialik. Oh my gosh, I'm totally butchering her name,
It happens.
but yes,
I like how you're
Mayim Bialik.
actually considering the zombie apocalypse in this question because I think if I were to answer this, I would blow straight past the zombie apocalypse and just be like, who do I want to hang out with? But that's great. Yeah. I mean, and I think Pedro is like the best answer because he has all the stories, right? Like, you could just listen to him. He's also good looking. So if you have to repopulate the earth, he's not complaining. And yeah, he has zombie experience, I
Yeah.
guess. Closest thing
That
anyone
counts,
can.
right? Yeah.
That's amazing. I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. I think I would like want to choose celebrities that I could watch like the drama unfold on. Like,
Oh.
just put me in a house with the Kardashians or something. Like, I just want to see them fight each other.
Oh my gosh. Well, that would definitely be entertaining.
Yeah, yeah. Like, put me in the house with three reality stars who are trying to like Instagram and TikTok the whole thing. Just, yeah. So I invited you on today because you had two amazing Facebook posts in 1 week. And I was like, shut the front door. Like, we have got to talk about this. And so we're going to talk a little bit about both of those today. But the first one is, it's National Hispanic Heritage Month, and you released a resource through Fuller Youth Institute's Centro Latino. And the resource was on the contextual needs of Hispanic, Latino church leaders and youth. So I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the findings from your research? And for those listening, this is free on Fuller Youth Institute's website too.
Yeah, so this came out of a collaboration with Fuller Seminary Centro Latino, with us, FYI, and with the Brown Church Institute. And the research was done from a, a wide spread search through the US, and even some Latin American respondents. And there were there are five main findings, and I think I'll mention some of the findings that I think are helpful not just for the Latinx context, but also for other contexts as well.
Mhm.
So one of the findings that we have is that there are generational gaps.
Mhm.
In the Latinx community, we have the immigrant generation who is like the parents or the grandparents, and then we have the kids who are might be 1.5 generation. They might have been born in Mexico or another Latin American country, and they were raised here in the US, or they were born here in the US and they're like second generation. So there's a gap between these generations because the context that they come from, their cultural context is so different. So one
Mhm.
of the things that we found is that there needs to be bridge building. And this is just not just a middle person, and the middle people are very important, right? It's like the middle generation. In my case, in like the context for me, it would be like I'm a millennial, and then there are younger people that are like Gen Z and Gen A, Gen Alphas, and then there's like our parents, right? And so like I'm kind of like a middle person between Gen Z and the older people, but we can't just pin those things on one millennial generation or the middle generation. There needs to be a bridging of those gaps from both generations and really all of the generations that are involved. And another one is that there needs to be more mental health education and
Mm.
support.
Mhm.
And this just goes all throughout the US. Gen Z and Gen Alpha need more mental health support. It's um, it's something that a lot of people in youth ministry are wanting to get more resources on to educate not just themselves so they can help teenagers and adolescents, but so they can help their parents or the church help these people, these young people. And then another one is that we need safe spaces and relevant dialogue. So young people have a lot of questions, and there's a lot of stuff going on in their world, and they need a space in their faith community where they can talk about those things, when they can talk about the questions that are hard and not be shut down or not be ashamed or not be judged for the questions that they have, and where God's message and the message of faith talks to the realities of their lives. So like how does how does the Bible talk about immigration, or how does the Bible talk about social justice or economic justice? You know, because sometimes these are families that have a lower socioeconomic status, and so you know they come to the church or they come to these communities, and there's so much that is talked about faith, but that faith doesn't seem relevant to what's going on in their lives. So that's
Mhm.
what young people need, spaces where they can bring up those questions and they can feel safe to bring up those questions. And I think that those are things that aren't just particular to the Latinx community. That's something that young people from all ethnicities are needing in our churches.
It's great. I love that you picked points that highlight all youth, not just Latinx youth. But I do think that there are youth workers, especially white youth workers like myself, who are wondering, how can I best make space and support my Latinx youth that are in my youth group, especially maybe in a mostly white church or mostly white context? What can we do for our Latinx youth to make space for them um, and to make space for them um, and their identity?
Mhm. I think a really important place to start is to be honest and vulnerable about um, where you are in your in your social awareness or cultural awareness journey. Um, Once we know where we know what steps we can take or where our
Mhm.
blind spots are, and then we can start um, to fill in those gaps and even come to the students or to their parents and ask about those things. But something that's really, really important and really easy is that we need to listen and ask questions. And
Mhm.
so, even just asking a student, like, hey, what would make you feel welcome here? Is
Mhm.
there anything that we can do in this space? How do you say your name? Or do you have a nickname that your family calls you by? Or do you have a nickname that you want to be called by that's not necessarily um, the way that we might pronounce your name with an English accent? Um, is there are there any impediments to you doing any of the activities that we're doing? Or have you been, or yeah, like sometimes in white spaces there are activities that a person of color or young Latino kid might not have had like the experience or like the access to do that, right? And so sometimes even like asking or like giving them a heads up of like, hey, this is something that we're thinking of doing. Would you feel comfortable doing that? Is
Mm.
that something that you would like to do? Is that something that your parents would allow you to go to or something like that?
Mhm.
Because sometimes, like if there's like ski trips or, just other things that are haven't been accessible to that family or are just not part of the Latin culture, parents might be hesitant to let their kids join those activities. And then the kid might feel like, oh, well, I feel like I'm being punished by my parents, or like there's not that trust that has been established yet um, for the parents to allow their kids to, because really these kids are like code switching and being part of two worlds, right?
Mhm.
So, um, youth leaders have to help them navigate those two worlds and at
Mhm.
least be aware of it, and where they can, like lend a hand either with the parents or lend a hand at the youth ministry and to help a student out to make them feel more comfortable, um, yeah, in the space and with others.
That's great. Yeah, I've definitely tried to use a few of those. I've definitely listened to I had a student who everyone in the youth group was calling him by a name that I did not know him as. And so I
Mm,
asked him, I was like, "Hey, like why is everybody calling you Mario?" He was like, "Oh, well, it's easier for them to say." And I was like, "Do you want them to call you Mario?" And he was like, "Well, it's easier. It's easier." And I was like, "Your name is Mariano. That's not
mm.
hard.
Yeah.
That's not hard."
No.
What do you want people to call you? Mariano. Okay. Well, I'm going to call you Mariano. And when I hear people call you Mario, is it okay that I say that your name is Mariano? Yes. Okay. Like it was so silly to me that he
Mm.
allowed white kids to just say his name was too hard. It wasn't a hard name at all. Like there are hard names, and that is not one. And even the
Yeah.
hard names we learned how to say. Um, and then we changed up our snack bar too. We like listened
Mm.
to what those kids wanted to eat, and it wasn't necessarily the same stuff that we had already. And so we started like having Takis and other fun snacks. And listen, I love
Awesome. Yeah.
Takis too, so I was pumped. That stuff wrecks my but but I was pumped. So, just like small switches, asking kids, what do you
Yeah.
want? Like, what do you need? And trying to respond to that the best you can. So, yeah.
Yeah, and when we think about it, that's really not just helping the young kids that come from the Latinx background. That's really helping all of the
Yeah.
students because they're becoming more aware and learning more about other cultures. So whenever you can learn, ask the kids, or just also do some research on your own about what they might be into and incorporate it into the space or into the time that you have with the kids. Everyone can learn together.
Yeah. So, one thing that I read in the report is that there's a lack of resources specifically for Latinx youth. This obviously isn't surprising because
Mm.
most resources that are written for white, typically large evangelical churches. So, where can youth workers find resources for their Latinx youth or even just, whatever youth that they have in their midst who may be non white?
Yeah, and that's like it's a very important thing to note that even when there are like yes, there are these curriculums usually written for larger churches that have predominantly a white context, and sometimes those are translated into other languages or those are translated into Spanish. But just because you translate something verbally, it doesn't translate the context, and
Hmm.
so a lot of youth leaders find themselves having to change a lot of things that they get from these already translated resources that are not necessarily helpful or aware of the context of the young people that they are serving. But there are a few places that I have found or that we have seen in online that have been really helpful. First of all, we at the Fuller Youth Institute do have some resources in Spanish, and I can send you the link so that we can put it on the show notes page. But we do have several. We have some blog posts that are free for people to read that have been translated into Spanish, written by people who are working in a Latinx context. And when we translate a resource, we make sure that it's going to fit the context, or that it's at least aware of the Latinx context. It's not going to always fit a context because even the Latina church is not a monolith. So
Right.
there's always going to be some kind of contextualization that's going to have to be done. But another one is New Generation 3. And it is led by Elizabeth Tames Mendez, and she's a researcher that creates resources as well. Actually, I think they're going to be releasing a series of books that is called Juntos or Together. That was actually part of a sub grant that they did with us that
Mm.
was looking into character and virtue development. And so that's something that we're really excited to see from them. If anyone's looking just for like just resources in Spanish, E625 has a lot of resources. Well, not a lot, but they have the most in Spanish. They have been doing this for a while. And they'll definitely have like blog posts and other resources that are free in addition to curriculum. And then this is an organization that I particularly really like. It's not just geared towards the Latinx context, and it's not in Spanish, but it is an organization that makes curriculum, and it is created by leaders of color. It's made for PACs, and they make these wonderful they call them arcs, but they're like curriculum that people can use, and it's so different than the way that curriculum looks like usually, because there's like poems, or there's like music, and there's visuals that are used, that can be used in different ways for people to give lessons to young people. So those are a few of the resources or the organizations that I would recommend.
That's awesome. I think it's also great for youth workers to investigate Latinx theologians as
Yeah.
well. I know, like, I'm such a baby in this area, so by no means am I an expert, but I ran into the mujerista idea of kingdom instead of kingdom,
Mhm.
and it was so impactful that I based an entire week of camp around the idea of kingdom and use these resources to help share with our teenagers this idea. And most of my teenagers in that church were, 80% were white, 20% non-white. But I thought it was really important that even my white students hear about this theology, because I felt like, one, it was accurate, and two, I thought it was good for them to hear theology and theologians that came from a non-white source too. So that was really cool for me. Um, we need more representation of
Mhm.
Latinx youth workers in all areas of youth ministry, both in our local church as well as the resources and the leadership that churches consume. How can a Latinx youth worker who is listening get involved and get some exposure? How do you best recommend that they contribute? Because we need their voice in areas of leadership even beyond their parish.
Yeah, so I think one of the first things that comes to my mind is read the report
Hmm.
that we just shared, and share it as widely as you can. You know, send it to your leaders, send it to your senior leaders, send it to parents, send it to other higher ups, wherever it can go. Because um, I think sometimes it might seem, because there hasn't been a lot of research done for the Latina church, it might seem like whatever we are saying that we need is only like us, like that
Hmm.
person. But this report is really saying like these are pain points, or these are needs that people across the country are naming. And so there's a lot of really, really helpful language to put to the needs. And it kind of, I don't know if validates is the right word, but it kind of gives it more authority, right? To like all the needs and the research that has been done to say like, hey, this is real, like this is happening. We do need more resources. We do need this. Um, so that's one of the first things that comes to mind. I would say in the local church, give voice to the needs that you have. Name what's happening, um, because if we don't say what we need, if we don't raise our voice, then our leaders won't know. If they don't know, they're not going to tell like anyone else. And then if there's not like demand, this and I don't like that it gets this like capitalistic, but it's the truth. If organizations that are making resources don't see that there's a demand,
Mhm.
it might not seem viable to make resources that are translated or to make resources that are more contextual to minority contexts. And so we need to see that there will be a demand so that we can invest in those
Mhm.
resources so that we can like continue to share those. And then I think I would say for um senior leaders, if there's any senior leaders listening, or any other leaders that are at denominational levels, or people that have the ear of denominational level leaders, especially in the Latina church, I would say think about resourcing youth leaders. In a lot of Latina churches, youth leaders are volunteers, they are not paid.
Mhm.
And their budgets in all churches, youth ministry budget is never the priority. In some, I would say in all, in some churches. Um, and so, in order for leaders to get the resources that they need in the context that they need it in, they need to have the budgets to be able to purchase those curriculums. And so, it's necessary for them to have access to that. Well, like we can create resources. I'm speaking as someone who's part of an organization, but if we can't show that there is a need and that it's going to be viable for us to spend all that time and energy and capital into creating the resources,
Mhm.
we also can't validate like putting all that investment. So it's like we need to hear you that you want it, and then we need to we need you to support us when we do create those resources for you and we have them ready.
That's great. That's great. I work for a diocese now, and it's really great to see these, like, the leaders of the diocese, the bishop, her staff, taking Spanish classes and like doing the work to make sure that they can reach the Spanish speaking congregations in our diocese, not by forcing them to use English, but speaking Spanish to them. And that has been really cool. I like most people, took Spanish all throughout middle and high school, like barely used it since, right? It's been a
Yeah.
little long time. But it's been encouraging to see that. And it has helped me realize, okay, so probably need to re-up my Duolingo account, probably need to go a step further, probably need to take a
Yeah.
class, like reuse those skills, because the statistics tell us that a large portion of the United States is going to be Hispanic, Latino, by 20, whatever the number is. And so, like, we need to catch up and not assume, we being white people, not assume people will come to us on our level, but, we need to, um, yeah, like come to our neighbors and learn Spanish and like make space for people to be their full selves. And so yeah, so that's been very encouraging and a humble reminder that I need to brush off the skills. So
Yeah,
um
definitely. I think, yeah, that the statistic is when Gen Z statistics were coming around, a quarter of Gen Z is already Latinx, and
Wow.
more than 50% is not white, is already a majority of minority. And so Gen Alpha is also mirroring those statistics. And I would
Wow.
say, if you are someone who is relearning or brushing up on your Spanish skills, um, the kids are very forgiving, and
Hmm.
they might be making fun of you for a little while, but it doesn't, it's you don't have to speak perfect Spanish,
Hmm.
as long as you're trying. And these are kids that are also in bilingual spaces, and
Hmm.
Spanglish is going to be their most dominant language probably, and so if they can do Spanglish, they'll be like, they'll respect that you are even putting in the time or the effort and being vulnerable to try
Hmm.
and communicate with them, even if it's in Spanglish. It doesn't have to be a perfect Spanish, and don't, yeah.
If they weren't
So
making fun of me for that, they'd be making fun of me for something else. So,
yes, that's true.
One of the resources that the Centro Latino of Florida Seminary put out recently is a discussion of self compassion in ministry. And I keep hearing
Yeah.
this term self compassion quite a bit now. What is self compassion, and why is it especially important for youth workers to learn about?
Yeah, self-compassion. So we've actually done self-compassion, this conversation of self-compassion, as the first of a series of Facebook Lives that are going to be talking about compassion, because the Fuller Youth Institute released a curriculum on compassion. And so one of the
Mm,
lessons in the curriculum talks about self-compassion, and we wanted the leaders to understand first how compassion works in their lives, so that when we do another Facebook Live that touches on how we teach young people compassion, they would have more of an understanding on how that works. Intergenerationally, and for them, and for young people. So self-compassion, one of the ways that I have heard it like described that I really like is caring for yourself the way that you would care for someone else that
mm,
is important in your life. And psychology shows us that we can't fully develop compassion for other people. We can't really show compassion to others unless we know what it is and we have shown it to ourselves.
yeah.
And so, a lot of the times, this saying that we think about, right, of like, you can't pour from an empty cup,
Mm,
comes self compassion comes into that. If we can't show ourselves compassion, we can't show it to other people. Like, that's already ran out, and we can't even show it to ourselves. Um, it's not gonna relate. It's not gonna translate with others. Um, so it's important for us as youth leaders, because I think sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves, or we're like our own worst critics, and we're not going to do ministry perfectly. And we're in this journey of learning, right? Just how to be human in the first place, and then how to minister to others, and how to grow in faith ourselves. And so we really need a lot of compassion for ourselves in our journey as we're going through it, because we're learning continuously. We're never going to arrive once here on earth. We're not going to arrive. And so um we need to give ourselves kindness, and also care for ourselves. Self-care also comes into this, because a lot of youth leaders are either full-time youth leaders, or are bivocational, or are doing something else, or are parents. So a youth leader is not just doing one thing. They are doing so many things.
mhm,
And these are like energy and emotional labor and so many other things that other people are asking us for, that at the end of the day, or once in a while, or regularly, we need to come back and check in with ourselves, and check in with God, and say, okay, how am I doing in this? Because if we don't do that, we're going to burn out.
yeah,
And, that's statistically, we have seen that there's pastors, there are leaders that are burning out, that are leaving ministry, or have to take a step back. And if we don't take care of ourselves, that's sadly, that's where we will end up having to. being made to stop because our bodies can't go on anymore or our mental health can't permit us to go on anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I keep thinking about Charlie Conder's talk at the Women in Youth Ministry Conference earlier this year. She talked about, yeah, you remember. I mean, it was so
Yeah.
good. She talked about how she was burning out so hard at work that it literally paralyzed her at the end of the
Mhm.
night. And a coworker would literally wheel her in an office chair to her car because like that's the damage that it did to her body. And I just think while that may seem like an extreme example of what can happen, I think that happens in a lot of different ways to us, especially as women, especially since most women are bivocational, volunteer. We just burn out trying to care for all the things all the time, all at
Yeah.
once. Um, that's amazing. Well, clearly you're doing some good work between this self-compassion work and between this guide and all of the other projects you have going on. You keep posting on Facebook. I'm going to have to keep inviting you back because I literally got so excited the other day, just like I was like, "Wait, did Roslyn just post another amazing thing? I need to message her right now."
Well, I mean, yeah, we have a lot of stuff going on at FYI, so whenever I can, yeah, whenever I can share about it, I'm so glad to come back and talk about it.
That's awesome, and I hope that we could see you again at the conference next year too, because it was awesome connecting with you earlier this year.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, we have one question that we love to end our interviews in, and that
Mhm.
is, we are the Women in Youth Ministry podcast. We do have all genders listening, but we're a podcast that cares specifically for women. What is something that you would like to say to the women listening? It might be a word of encouragement. It might be something that you've been thinking about lately. It's fair game here.
Yeah, I'm thinking about something that I mentioned in that conversation about self compassion, particularly with women. Women are taught to care for others, to be caregivers. And sometimes what happens in there is that we neglect ourselves
Mm,
and we forget to give ourselves compassion and we forget to give ourselves care and kindness. And so, like self compassion and self care was exemplified by God. Like God rested and was like, this is cool. This is good. Look at all I did. I'm going to like kick back and, lay down and just say, like, look at all this stuff. And Jesus also like took breaks, like mental health breaks after like
mm,
John the Baptist was murdered and like get all these verses of like Jesus went out by himself to pray or like went out by himself and like was in solitude. Um and so yeah, I think we get examples, in the Bible of like taking care of ourselves, but then society conditions us to do a lot of work for others. So I would say it's okay to say no. I know it might be hard. um and I know that many um there might be consequences to saying no in some instances. Um, but those healthy boundaries are really important for us as women to slowly start setting those up for if we want to keep going in youth ministry or just ministry in general. We need to, yeah, just learn to have more clear boundaries with
mm,
our time and our energy. And saying no is totally okay when you think that you're not going to have the time, when you think you're not going to have the energy, when you think, oh, I think someone else can do that. You can say, like, hey, there's this other person that is also really great at doing this other thing. Because not just as youth leaders, but also as women, I think uh, in ministry, it's easy for leaders to say like, "Oh, well, so and so can help with this. Like they've helped before," or like just like people to shout out your name for anything, just because you're a woman that has helped before with something. And so it's okay to say no. It's okay to say no. And no is a whole sentence.
the whole sentence. I just downloaded the book Rest is Resistance, and I'm excited to
Mhm.
dig into that. I've heard a lot of people talk about it. Like, yeah, rest is resistance. Like, Yeah, I listened to a sermon by a local a local pastor last week, and she did a midrash of the Israelites in the desert, and her midrash talked about like Joshua. It imagined Joshua like storing up manna, and when Moses finally confronted him, Moses was like, "You're storing up all of this manna, and it's also causing you to miss the Sabbath." And that was like the one rule God had about this manna thing, you know? And it was really interesting because she preached against the way that capitalism and like pursuit of wealth and like excellence has caused us to completely miss like the one commandment God has for us. And I was howling in the pew, which you're not supposed to do in the Episcopal Church. And I'm in a howling for So, but I didn't grow up Episcopal. I grew up Baptist, and we howled. Okay.
Hey, you're talking to someone who grew up Pentecostal, or it would be
Yep.
amening all throughout the service.
Yep. Yep. Well, it was so good to have you on, Roslyn. And where can people find you online? You
Yeah,
and
so
your work.
yes, I think the best place would probably be like Facebook or Instagram. You can also look for any if you're interested in pop culture and want to look more into that. If you go to Think Christian and just look up my name, you can see my contributor page, and it's also going to be in the show notes. But
Mhm.
yeah, Facebook and Instagram is. I'm not like a. I don't post very often, so it's
Just been a
it's
week
like
of excellence.
yeah. But yes, whenever I post, you can find it there, Instagram and Facebook.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for being on. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you all real soon.